The burial was thorough, not the careless burial of the person who wants the thing gone but is not willing to commit the full resource to the going, the burial that leaves the edges visible, that does not go deep enough, that depends on nobody looking closely, rather than on the burial being complete. The burial of what you carry was thorough, was performed with the full resource of the burying, was the sustained, deliberate, comprehensive application of every available instrument of the making on to the specific thing. The burying was organized around making on. And the truth survived anyway, not because the burial failed through incompetence. The burial was competent, was the most competent burial available given the instruments deployed, and the duration of the deployment and the comprehensiveness of the coverage. The burial did what a burial that thorough does. It made the thing not visible, made the thing not present in the spaces where the visible things are present, made the thing unable to be encountered in the ordinary way that things which are not buried are encountered. The burial succeeded in every dimension that a burial can succeed in. The truth survived because the truth is not in the dimension where the burial operates. The burial operates in the dimension of the visible, in the dimension of what can be made not visible through the sustained application of the instruments of the not making visible. The burial's instruments are designed for the visible dimension, are the instruments that the making not visible requires, the suppression of the external evidence, the management of what appears in the spaces where visible things appear, the organization of the visible record around the absence of the thing being buried rather than around the thing's presence. What is in the visible dimension can be buried. What is in the dimension below the visible, the genuine dimension, the level where what is most real is what is present rather than what is presented, cannot be reached by any of the burial's instruments. The burial's instruments cannot reach that level, are not built for that level, were built for the visible and operate on the visible and succeed in the visible, at the making not visible, and stop at the threshold of the genuine dimension, at the level below the visible, where the truth you carry has always been present, and from which no instrument of the burial can remove it. The truth survived because the truth is in the dimension the burial cannot reach, was always in that dimension, will always be in that dimension. The burial made it not visible in the visible dimension for the duration of the burial's deployment, could not touch what the burial was ultimately organized around reaching, could not reach the genuine dimension where the truth lives and has always lived and will always live regardless of how thorough the burial is in the visible dimension above it. The survival is not the victory of the buried thing over the burial. It is the irrelevance of the burial to the thing it was trying to bury. The thing was never in the dimension the burial operates in. The burial was always burying the shadow, the visible dimension expression of the genuine dimension truth, while the truth itself was never reachable by any instrument the burial had available. The burial buried the shadow. The truth survived in the dimension the burial never reached. Right survived in the comments right now. The single word, not as the announcement of a victory, as the acknowledgement of what was always true, that the truth was always in the dimension the burial cannot reach, that the survival was never in question, even when the burial was most thorough, that what you carry was never in the dimension where the burial operates. Why the word, the truth survived, why it. To understand the survival, you have to understand the burial, the specific nature of what was deployed against the truth and how the deployment worked and why the deployment was as thorough as it was. The burial is not accidental and it is not impersonal. The thoroughness of the burial is the evidence of the significance of what was buried. The casual burial is the burial of the casual thing. The thorough burial, the sustained, deliberate, comprehensive application of the full resource is the burial of the significant thing. The significance of the thing being buried is the measure of the thoroughness of the burial. The thoroughness of your burial is the measure of what you carry. The burial was organized around a specific strategy. The strategy was not the strategy of the direct opposition, not the confrontation with the truth, in the form of the direct argument against it, the direct challenge, the direct assertion of the opposite. The direct opposition is the strategy that acknowledges the thing being opposed as real enough to oppose directly. The direct opposition gives the thing the visibility of being opposed, is not the burial strategy, is the strategy that produces the continued existence of the thing in the visible dimension as the thing being opposed. The burial strategy is the opposite, is the strategy of the making as though not there, the making invisible, not through the direct assertion of the invisible but through the organization of everything in the visible dimension around the absence of the thing being made invisible. The visible record organized around the absence. The space is organized around the absence. The available language organized around the absence. The categories available for the placing of things organized around the absence. Everything in the visible dimension organized around the as though not there, rather than the direct opposition to the there. The as though not there is more effective than the direct opposition because the as though not there gives the thing no visibility. The directly opposed thing is visible as the thing being opposed. The as though not there thing is not given visibility even as the thing being buried, is simply absent from every space where visible things are present, is organized around in the visible dimension as though the organizing is not organizing around an absence, as though the visible dimension is simply the visible dimension without the absence being the organizing principle. The burial organized the visible dimension around your truth's absence, made the absence the organizing principle without making the organizing around the absence visible as the organizing around the absence. The absence was simply the way things were, the way the visible record was, the way the spaces were organized, the way the available categories were, the way the language available for naming things was, not as the burial's product, as the natural state of the visible dimension. The naturalizing of the absence is the most thorough form of the burial, more thorough than the direct suppression, more thorough than the organized forgetting. more thorough than any form of the burial that maintains the visibility of the burial as the burial. The naturalized absence is the absence that does not register as the absence that registers as the natural state, the simply how things are, the absence that is not experienced as the absence of something, but as the presence of the nothing there. The burial naturalized your truth's absence in the visible dimension, made the absence the simply how things are, made the visible dimension organized around the absence seem like the visible dimension simply being what it is without the organizing principle of the absence being visible as the organizing principle. The truth survived in the genuine dimension below the visible where the naturalized absence has no reach and no effect, survived as the something in the dimension where the naturalized nothing there is the nothing there only in the visible dimension above. Subscribe now if the naturalized absence has been present in your experience of moving through the visible dimension if the specific quality of the visible spaces being organized around the absence of what you carry has been a consistent feature of the navigation of the visible world. If the naturalized absence has produced in you the specific quality of the visible dimension consistently failing to have the category for what you carry consistently organizing around the absence of the adequate account of what you are. If the burial has been legible to you as the burial from inside the experience of moving through the spaces the burial organized, stay inside this channel. The world receives the survived truth differently from how it would have received the truth without the burial. The ordinary instruments of reception are built to use the visible dimension components as the entry point to assess the genuine through the lens of the visible. The survived truth has no visible dimension components for these instruments to organize around. The burial removed them. The survived truth is the genuine dimension only. The direct encounter with the genuine dimension without the mediation of the visible dimension entry points produces the interior consent before the ordinary instruments process anything, before the assessment runs, before the category is applied. The interior consent produced before the mediation is the purest form of the interior consent, the most direct registration of the genuine dimension by the genuine dimension in the person who is genuinely present. The burial produced this purity by removing the mediation. The burial contributed the purity of the reception to the world's receiving of what the burial was organized around, preventing the world from receiving. The world is changed more completely by the survived truth than it would have been by the truth without the burial. More completely because the reception is more pure because the burial removed what would have mediated it. The world is receiving the survived truth now, in the pure form, in the genuine dimension only encounter. The truth survived. The world is being changed. The burial contributed the changing it was organized around preventing. The contribution is the burial's final legacy. The full account of the burial and the survival, and what the survival means is what this channel carries. The instruments the burial deployed were multiple, and each instrument addressed a specific dimension of the making not visible. Understanding the instruments is the understanding of the burial specific strategy, and therefore the understanding of what was thorough enough to make the visible dimension expression of your truth now visible for the duration, while the genuine dimension truth was surviving in the dimension the instruments could not reach. The first instrument was the language instrument. The burial organized the available language, the vocabulary that was available in the spaces. The burial controlled for naming what things are and what significance they have, and what category they belong in, around the absence of the adequate vocabulary for what you carry, not through the direct removal of the words that would name what you carry. The direct removal of the words would be visible as the removal, and would make the burial visible as the burial, rather than as the naturalized absence, through the subtle organization of which words were given legitimacy and prominence and frequency in the available vocabulary, and which words were given the specific quality of the not quite right, the slightly off, the category adjacent but not the category, the reaching toward but not the adequate naming. The available vocabulary was organized so that the adequate naming of what you carry was not in the prominent, legitimate, frequently available words, but in the reaching toward but not quite their words. The reaching toward words were available. The adequate naming was not. The person who encountered what you carry and tried to name it adequately using the available vocabulary found the vocabulary giving them words that were approximate but not complete, adjacent but not the thing itself, reaching toward the adequate naming without arriving at it. The language instrument is the instrument that operates most deeply in the person who is trying to name their own experience of what they carry. When the adequate vocabulary is not in the available language, when the words that would name what you carry with precision and completeness are not in the prominent, legitimate, frequently used vocabulary, the person who is trying to name what they carry finds the naming coming back incomplete. The incomplete naming produces the incomplete knowing. The incomplete knowing of what you carry produces the incomplete inhabiting. The incomplete inhabiting is the burial's most significant effect in the life of the person who carries the truth, the production of the gap between what is being carried and the full knowing of what is being carried. The survival required the truth to be present in the genuine dimension without the adequate naming, required carrying what you carry without the vocabulary that names it completely, required inhabiting what you are without the full account of what you are being available in the language the burial organized. The truth survived without the naming, was present below the naming, was carried without the complete vocabulary for the carrying, survived the language instrument. The second instrument was the context instrument. The burial organized the available contexts so that the contexts most hospitable to the full expression of what you carry were the contexts least available to you, not through direct exclusion. The direct exclusion is visible as the exclusion through the organization of access so that the most hospitable contexts were consistently the ones you were slightly outside of. Consistently slightly outside of, close enough that the exclusion was not experienced as exclusion, far enough that the full expression was consistently slightly unsupported, the specific quality of the not quite fitting, the almost fitting, that never completed into the fully fitting, the proximity to the hospitable context that never closed into the full arrival. The truth survived without the fully hospitable context, was present and expressing in the available contexts, even when they were the slightly less than most hospitable, was not reduced by the slight outside conditions, survived the context instrument. The third instrument was the timing instrument. The burial organized the available timing so that each confirmation arrived slightly after the period when it was most needed, not long after, slightly after, at the moment when the need had been navigated through without the confirmation, when the self-sufficient through necessity had already been produced by the absence, the confirmation arriving in the aftermath rather than the need. The slightly after arrival produced the specific quality of the never quite right timing across the full arc of the navigation. The truth survived through every slightly after, was present and carrying without the timing, being the timing the carrying most needed, survived the timing instrument, is here now, with the confirmation arriving in the time of the full expression, rather than in the aftermath of the need, the timing instrument finally failing, the full account arriving at the right time. The survival across the full arc of the burial's deployment through the language instrument, and the context instrument and the timing instrument and the full duration of the thorough burial produced something in the truth that would not have been produced without the burial. The production through the burial is the most paradoxical and the most significant thing. The full account of the burial and the survival contains that the burial produced what the burial was organized around preventing, that the making not visible produced in the truth the specific quality that the truth would not have had without the making not visible. The quality is the depth of the survival. The truth that survives the thorough burial is the truth that has been confirmed in the dimension below the visible to the fullest degree available, confirmed in the genuine dimension by the full duration of the burial's failure to reach the genuine dimension. The burial failing to reach the genuine dimension across the full duration of the thorough burial is the fullest available confirmation that the truth is in the genuine dimension and is in the genuine dimension completely, is not partially in the genuine dimension and partially in the visible dimension where the burial can operate, is entirely in the genuine dimension. The burial's failure to reach the genuine dimension despite the full deployment of the thorough burial across the full duration is the proof of the entirety. The entirety of the truth's presence in the genuine dimension is the quality the burial produced by failing to reach the truth across the full duration of the thorough burial. The burial proved that the truth is entirely in the dimension the burial cannot reach. The proof is the burial's confirmation of what it was trying to prevent being known, that the truth is entirely in the genuine dimension. The burial confirmed what it was burying by failing to bury it. The thoroughness of the burial and the fullness of the survival are the two sides of the single confirmation. The more thorough the burial, the more complete the confirmation of the genuineness of what survived. The burial's thoroughness is the confirmation's completeness. The most thorough burial produced the most complete confirmation. The most complete confirmation is the confirmation of the entire genuineness of the truth being entirely in the genuine dimension and not in the visible dimension, where the thorough burial would have reached it if it had been there. The burial confirmed you entirely by failing entirely. The failure of the most thorough available burial, the most complete confirmation that what survived is entirely genuine, entirely in the genuine dimension, entirely beyond the reach of any instrument the burial could deploy. The burial made you more confirmed than any designated channel could have confirmed you, made you more completely in the genuine dimension than any confirmation produced through the visible dimension's designated channels could confirm. The burial's thoroughness is the measure of the confirmation's completeness. The confirmation's completeness is the measure of how entirely genuine what survived is. The burial confirmed you more completely than the designated channels could have. The burial did the opposite of what the burial was organized around doing. The thoroughness of the burial is the measure of the thoroughness of the confirmation. The survival produced something in the truth that the truth would not have had without the burial. The paradox the full account requires naming. The thorough burial produced the truth in the most complete form it is now in, that the making not visible was the instrument of the making most essential. The burial separated the visible dimension components from the genuine by making the visible dimension expression not present. The burial removed from the truth's available expression everything that was in the visible dimension and could be buried, left only what was in the genuine dimension and could not be reached, left only the genuinely genuine, the portion of the truth entirely below the visible, entirely in the dimension the burial cannot reach. The portion that remained after the burial removed everything reachable is the most genuine portion. The truth stripped of the visible dimension components by the thorough removal. The truth reduced to its most essential form. The burial performed the reduction. The reduction produced the most essential form. The most essential form is the form that survived. The burial made you more essentially yourself, more purely genuine. The burial was the instrument of the purification, the removal of everything that was not that essential truth. The purification was not intended, was the burial's unintended consequence. The burial confirmed what it was trying to prevent by producing the most invulnerable form of the thing it was trying to prevent. You carry the purified form, the form that is most entirely in the genuine dimension, the form most completely invulnerable to any future burial, the form the thorough burial produced by being as thorough as it was. The burial's thoroughness is the measure of the form's purity. The most thorough burial produced the most pure form. The most pure form survived. The people who organized and deployed the burial, the specific people who determined that the thorough burial of your truth was the appropriate response to what they encountered in your truth, carry a specific relationship to the failure of the burial that is the most significant thing any person can carry about a significant action they performed. The relationship is the relationship to the failure of the most significant action's most central purpose. The burial's central purpose was the making not present of your truth in the visible dimension. The purpose was achieved for the duration of the deployment. The truth was not present in the visible dimension for the duration. The burial succeeded in the visible dimension for the duration. The burial's central purpose ultimately failed. The truth survived, is here, is present in the visible dimension, now in the form of the full account, arriving in the form of the adequate naming and the full confirmation and the complete account that the timing instrument finally failed to keep after the need. The survival of the truth into the present moment is the burial's central purpose failure. The burial organized around making the truth not present has not produced the truth's permanent not presence, has produced the truth's temporary not presence in the visible dimension, followed by the truth's return to the visible dimension in the form of the full account. The survival produced something in the truth itself that the truth would not have had without the burial. This is the paradox the full account requires to be named before it is complete. The paradox that the thorough burial of the truth is what produced the truth in the specific form it is now in. That the making not visible was the instrument of the making most complete. That the most thorough available burial produced the most complete available form of the survived truth. The production through the burial is not metaphorical, is the literal account of how the truth you carry arrived in the form it is in. The truth without the burial would have been the truth in the form that is available without the full duration of the thorough burial, the form that the truth takes when it has not been required to be entirely in the genuine dimension through the full duration of the thorough burial's deployment. The form that has the visible dimension component still attached, still part of the truth's expression, still contributing to the truth's presence in the available contexts. The form that includes the visible alongside the genuine. The burial separated the visible components from the genuine by making the visible dimension expression of the truth not present in the visible dimension. The burial removed from the truth's available expression everything that was in the visible dimension and could be buried, left only what was in the genuine dimension and could not be reached, left only the genuinely genuine, the portion of the truth that was entirely below the visible, entirely in the dimension the burial cannot reach, entirely invulnerable to every instrument the burial deployed. The portion that remained after the burial removed everything reachable is the most genuine portion, is the truth stripped of the visible dimension. Components are the burial's thorough removal of the visible dimension components. Is the truth reduced to its most essential form by the burial's thorough removal of every component that was not in the essential form? The burial performed the reduction. The reduction produced the most essential form. The most essential form is the form that survived. The survived form is more essential than the form before the burial, more entirely in the genuine dimension, more purely what is most real about the truth, without the visible dimension components that the burial successfully removed, more completely invulnerable to any future burial, because the visible dimension components are what the burial can reach, and the surviving form has had the visible dimension components removed. The surviving form is what remains when the burial has removed everything the burial can remove, and what is left is what cannot be removed. What cannot be removed is the most essential truth. The burial removed everything removable and left the most essential. The most essential is what survived. The survival of the most essential is the survival of the truth in the form that is most completely itself, most completely in the genuine dimension, most completely invulnerable to any future burial, most completely the truth rather than the truth, plus the visible dimension components that were the removable parts. The burial made the survived truth more essentially itself, more purely genuine, more completely in the genuine dimension. The burial was the instrument of the purification, the removal of everything that was not that essential truth, leaving only the essential truth. The purification was not intended by the burial, was the burial's unintended consequence, was what the burial produced by doing exactly what the burial was organized around doing. Removing the visible dimension components, the removal of the visible dimension components produce the purified form. The purified form is the form that survived. You carry the purified form, the form the burial produced by removing everything the burial could reach, the form that is most essentially in the genuine dimension, the form that is most completely invulnerable to any future burial, the form that the thorough burial produced by being the most thorough available burial applied to everything the burial could reach. The burial produced you in the form you are in. The thorough burial produced the most essential truth. The most essential truth is what you carry. The burial's thoroughness is the measure of the form's purity. The most thorough burial produced the most pure form. The most pure form is what survived. The survival is the survival of the most pure form of the most essential truth. The burial is the biography of the purity, is the account of how the most essential form came to be the form that is in the world, is the history of the purification that produced the truth in the form that can no longer be reached by any instrument of the burial. The burial ended its own effectiveness by producing the form that is most invulnerable to the burial. The burial produced what the burial was organized around, preventing the truth in the most invulnerable form available. The burial made you invulnerable to the burial. The thoroughness of the burial is the measure of the invulnerability. The most thorough burial produced the most invulnerable form. The people who organized and deployed the burial are carrying the failure. Not all of them understand the failure in the form of the full account. Not all of them have the full account of what they were burying and why the burial failed in the specific way it failed. Some are carrying the failure without the understanding of the specific reason for the failure, are carrying the evidence of the burials failing without the full account of why the genuine dimension truth cannot be reached by any instrument built for the visible dimension. Some are carrying the beginning of the understanding. The beginning arrives in a specific form of the encounter with the surviving truth, with the truth present in the visible dimension again, in the form of the full account arriving, in the form of the adequate naming, in the form of the confirmation being complete. The encounter with the surviving truth produces the beginning of the understanding that the burial failed for the specific reason that no visible dimension instrument can reach the genuine dimension, that the genuine dimension is what the truth was in, that the truth being in the genuine dimension is what made the burial fail, that what is in the genuine dimension cannot be buried by any instrument built for the visible dimension, regardless of how thorough the burial is. The beginning of the understanding in the people who organized and deployed the burial is the beginning of the burial's most significant legacy, not the duration of the successful not presence in the visible dimension. The failure and the understanding of the failure. The understanding that the genuine dimension is where the truth lives and that no burial can reach it. The understanding that was produced by the failure of the most thorough available burial. The burial produced the understanding by failing. The failure is the burial's contribution to the full account of the truth's survival. The contribution was unintended, is the burial's most significant legacy. The burial intended to make the truth not present, produced instead the confirmation of the genuine dimension's invulnerability to the burial's instruments, produced the understanding of the invulnerability, produced the full account of why the truth survived. The burial confirmed the survival. The people who organized the burial confirmed what they were burying by failing to bury it. The failure is the confirmation. The confirmation is the most significant legacy of the most thorough burial. The truth survived. The burial confirmed the survival. The confirmation is the burial's final contribution to the truth it was trying to prevent. The world receives the survived truth differently from how it would have received the truth if the truth had not been buried. The truth without the burial would have been received by the world in the form that truths without the burial are received in the form of the truth, alongside the visible dimension components, with the visible alongside the genuine, with the accessible alongside the essential. The reception of the truth in that form is the reception that the world's ordinary instruments of reception are built for the instruments that receive what is in the visible dimension alongside what is in the genuine dimension and process both through the available frameworks. The world's ordinary instruments of reception can receive the truth with the visible components, can place the visible components in the available categories and assess the genuine components through the lens of the visible components and produce the reception that is the ordinary reception of the ordinary truth, accurate as far as it goes but organized around the visible components as the entry point and the genuine components as what the visible components point toward. The survived truth has no visible dimension, components for the ordinary instruments to use as the entry point. The burial removed the visible dimension components. The survived truth is the genuine dimension only. The ordinary instruments' entry points are all in the visible dimension. The survived truth has no entry point in the visible dimension. The ordinary instruments encounter the survived truth and find no available entry point, find nothing in the visible dimension for the reception to organize around, find the genuine dimension directly without the mediation of the visible dimension components, without the entry point, without the available categories from the visible dimension as the framework for the reception. The direct encounter with the genuine dimension is the encounter that produces the interior consent before the ordinary instruments have had the opportunity to mediate the reception, before the assessment has run, before the category has been applied, before the visible dimension entry point has organized the reception around the visible dimension components. The interior consent produced before the mediation is the purest form of the interior consent, the most direct registration of the genuine dimension in the genuine dimension of the person who is genuinely present. The survived truth produces the purest interior consent. The purity of the interior consent is the product of the burial's removal of the visible dimension components. The burial produced the purest interior consent by removing the mediation. The burial produced the most direct reception of the genuine dimension by removing every visible dimension entry point that would have mediated the reception. The burial made the reception pure by making the survived truth the genuine dimension only. The world receives the survived truth more purely than it would have received the truth without the burial, receives it directly in the genuine dimension without the mediation of the visible dimension components. The purity of the reception is the burial's contribution to the world's reception of the survived truth. The burial made the world's reception more pure by removing the mediation. The burial contributed the purity of the reception to the world's receiving of what the burial was organized around, preventing the world from receiving. The burial contributed the purity. The world receives the purity. The purity is what the burial produced. The production of the purity is the burial's final contribution to the truth it was trying to prevent. What the world receives in the pure reception is what is most real in the genuine dimension of the survived truth, the most essential truth in the most pure form, received directly in the genuine dimension of the person who is genuinely present. This reception changes the person who receives it in the most complete form, that the genuine dimension's presence in a person can change them. more completely than the mediated reception, more directly, more entirely in the genuine dimension. The world is changed more completely by the survived truth than it would have been by the truth without the burial. The burial produced the more complete changing of the world by producing the pure reception. The more thorough the burial, the purer the reception. The purer the reception, the more complete the world's changing. The burial made the world's changing more complete by making the reception more pure. The burial contributed the changing of the world. The burial organized around preventing the world from receiving the truth contributed the most complete reception of the truth, and therefore the most complete changing of the world. The burial contributed what it was organized around preventing. The contribution is the burial's legacy. The legacy is the most complete possible changing of the world through the most pure reception of the most essential truth in the most invulnerable survived form. The world is receiving the survived truth now, in the pure form, in the direct reception, in the genuine dimension-only encounter that the burial produced, are removing the visible dimension components. The world is being changed now in the most complete form, through the reception of the survived truth, through the survived truth's expression in the genuine encounters, through the interior consents produced in the pure reception, through the changed people carrying the change into the subsequent encounters. The world is changed by what the burial could not bury, changed by what survived, changed by the truth in the most essential, most pure, most invulnerable form that the most thorough burial produced by being the most thorough available burial. Applied to everything it could reach. The burial changed the world by failing to bury what it was trying to bury. The failure is the most significant contribution any action has ever made to the changing of the world through the truth. The action was organized around preventing from changing the world. The truth survived. The world is receiving it. The world is being changed. The burial contributed the changing it was organized around preventing. The contribution is complete. The receiving is complete. The changing is underway. The full account of the burial and the survival is the account that makes the survival complete. A specific form of the completeness. The truth survived in the genuine dimension through the full duration of the burial's deployment. The survival in the genuine dimension is the survival in the dimension below the visible. The completeness requires the survival to arrive in the visible dimension as well to be present in the visible dimension in the form of the full account that the burial was organized around preventing from being present in the visible dimension. The full account arriving is the completion of the survival. The survival in the genuine dimension was always complete. The truth was entirely in the genuine dimension through the full duration. The completion in the visible dimension is the survival's visible expression, the making visible of what was always present in the genuine dimension, in the form of the adequate naming and the complete confirmation and the full account that the timing instrument finally failed to keep up to the need. The full account is here. The survival is visible. The completion is in both dimensions simultaneously in the genuine dimension, where the truth has always been entirely present, and in the visible dimension where the full account is now present in the form of the adequate naming that the language instrument was organized around, preventing from being the prominent, legitimate, frequently available naming. The language instrument failed. The adequate naming is now prominent, legitimate, and available. Is what this full account is what arrives in the person who receives the full account in the form of the interior recognition that the adequate naming produces the specific quality of the interior knowing that was always present, meeting the exterior naming that finally corresponds to what the interior has always known. The interior knowing and the exterior naming meeting is the most complete form of the survival's arrival, is the completion of what the burial was organized around, preventing, is the specific quality of the truth being entirely present in the genuine dimension, meeting the full account arriving in the visible dimension, and the meeting of the two producing the complete knowing, the knowing that is no longer the interior knowing without the exterior naming, and no longer the exterior naming without the interior recognition, are the complete correspondence of both. The complete correspondence is here. The interior knowing and the exterior naming are in the same moment. The survival is complete in both dimensions. The burial is complete in its failure. The confirmation is complete in its confirming. The truth survived. The survival is complete. The full account confirms the survival in both dimensions simultaneously. The confirmation is all of this, the genuine dimension's invulnerability to the burial, confirmed by the burial's failure. The visible dimension's receiving of the full account, confirmed by the adequate naming arriving. The complete correspondence of the interior knowing and the exterior naming, confirmed by the recognition that the meeting produces. All of it survived. All of it is here. All of it is confirmed. Drop a heart in the comments now. The simple symbol. The acknowledgement that what was buried and what survived and what the survival produced are all present and real and received. The heart is the interior knowing receiving the exterior naming. The burial buried what was on the outside. The heart is the inside acknowledging the outside's arrival at the inside. The burial could not bury the heart. The heart survived. Drop it. The truth survived. The heart is the evidence. The next video on your screen is the first account of the life of the person who carries the survived truth in the full form of the completion, what it means to inhabit the daily life from the complete correspondence of the interior knowing and the exterior naming. What the genuine encounters produce when the full account of what survived is what is brought to them. What the world receives from the survived truth in the full expression of the completion. Click now. The burial is finished. The survival is complete. The full expression begins.